Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's the second time I've seen I, Daniel Blake. I promised myself I wasn't going to cry. Apologies for that, but I think what we've seen is probably one of the most important films for many, many years. Thank you all for being here to actually witness something so important. My name's Sasha Callahan. I'm from Disability History Scotland, and I'm going to be facilitating this question and answer session. We've got a fabulous panel this morning. I'm not going to waste time, and we're going to cut to the chase straight away. The first person that's going to speak is Jeane Freeman, representing the Scottish Government, and she's going to talk for about 15 minutes. So over to you, Jeane.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I'm not sure quite where to start here with this, because I suspect, like everybody in this audience, I found that both deeply moving, but also something that makes me very angry, because what we saw there are our lives destroyed. And the really important thing for me in all of that film is actually what was written by Daniel at the end, where he spoke about how he had worked hard his whole life, paid his dues, not a penny more and not a penny less. And he wanted to be treated with respect. Because in essence, that is the contract between the politicians you elect as your government and you as citizens. That the contract is that you will play your part and government should play its part in return. And what we have is a UK government that sees our social security system, or welfare as they choose to call it, because that's what suits them, as an easy route for cuts. Well, I don't believe that is true, sir. I believe that...
Okay, right. Excuse me, right now. Yeah, I can hear what you're saying.
And that DHS system here is run by the UK government. At the minute, every single benefit that people receive or are entitled to or have to fight their way to get in Scotland is delivered by the UK government. Now, shortly, the Scottish government will have the equivalent of 15% of the UK spend to set up a social security system in Scotland. And we've said from the outset two things: that our social security system will not be the source of saving money or making cuts, and it will be based on dignity, fairness and respect. We've got the opportunity in Scotland to build a system that we can be proud of and that is worthy of its name. What we can't do is fix everything that is wrong with the UK system, because we won't have the powers to do that. We won't have the powers over the employment and support allowance, which only last week Westminster voted not to cut, but the Tory government will cut. We don't have the power to stop a benefit cap, which they're reducing even more at Westminster, but we can't change that in Scotland. And we don't have the power to change universal credit either. But we do have the powers to make a difference to disability benefits, to carers allowance, and to others. And particularly the power to change how people are treated. So ours will be a social security system where we believe that it is an investment that each one of us make in ourselves and in each other. And it will be based from start to finish on dignity, fairness and respect. I've just spent 3 months listening to people like Daniel and others up and down the country tell me their stories and their experience. And you might not believe it, but every single one of those conversations will stay with me right through the building of our social security system. And they'll stay with me because I believe absolutely that the way we do this is we do it from the ground up. And that's why in January, we'll start a recruitment drive for 2,000 volunteers, people who themselves are on receipt of those 11 benefits. Come and join us and work with us to build that new system in Scotland, to make sure that it's not just fine words about dignity, fairness and respect. It actually lives it. And how it treats people, and how quickly decisions are made, and who you get to speak to, in the way that it communicates, and in the transparency of the decisions that are made. Some of those changes, we saw the desperate need for them in that film. But more importantly, many of those changes, people currently in receipt of those benefits told me about. So we will not have a system in Scotland that looks to stigmatise and belittle and demean people. Because there is no dignity in that, and there is no one in this cinema today who doesn't know the day when they might, like me, look to a social security system for the help and support we need. It is basic, it's part of our contract between government and people who elect us, and I am determined that the one we will build in Scotland, albeit only on 11 benefits, and we can't fix everything that is wrong with the UK system, but we will show that that system can be better, can be more humane, and can be based on the fact that those who come to it are entitled to our collective support and help. So I hope that many of the people who are here today, who may be on one of those 11 benefits, will look out for that recruitment exercise, will join us and help us over the next few years build a social security system that we can be proud of, and one that treats people as we would want to be treated ourselves, as fellow citizens and as fellow human beings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeane. Now, can I say, after something is so emotional as that film, it's obvious that feelings are going to be running high, and I think quite justifiably. But please, don't intervene from the audience at this moment. We are going to have a question and answer session right after the next speaker, and that's the point to come in. If you come in before that, there are people in this audience who are using the induction loop, who are being completely excluded from your interventions if you're not using the mic. Okay. So next, we've got Paul Laverty here. Right, scriptwriter of this wonderful, heartbreaking film. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much. I just heard the news on a radio program there, so I must, in all honesty, say Fidel Castro, rest in peace. Very interesting stories we tell each other. I just heard the BBC News report and it ended up, sorry, but we're getting a terrible echo here. Sorry about that. Can I use that bit? Can you hear me now? Yes, sorry about that. Yeah. It's interesting listening to how stories are told, how the narrative is shaped, and it ended up with the BBC report, a very quick one, with someone screaming at them being a dictator in Miami. And it's very, very interesting. I'm just back from Cuba actually. We're going to do a project there in Elizabeth, the Museum of the Revolution. And of course, on the BBC report, sorry, my apologies. Thank you very much for saying that. And anyway, it reminded me of what happened when 70 people came across in the boat from the Grama. They attacked the Batista Revolution. The boat landed in Cuba, and it was a total disaster. 35 were killed, if I remember roughly. Immediately, there were only 35 left. Most of them were dispersed. And Fidel Castro was along with 3 others, and he said, I found myself as commander-in-chief of myself and 3 others. It's a remarkable story, really, and we'll hear nothing about the terrible misery and the poverty that was the reality in Cuba before the revolution. I used to work as a human rights lawyer in Nicaragua too, in Central America, and we'll hear nothing too about the grand abuses, the systematic torture and murder that took place there with the support of the United States. We'll hear nothing about that in these reports. And in a strange way, again, it reminded me of how we tell stories to each other in the grand narrative, and how Fidel will be. And I mean, I've got contradictions with those too, the Stalinist tendencies, how it was pushed into the hands of the Soviet Union. There are lots of contradictions there, but the grand narrative is really important. And it links up with this story too. What fascinated Ken and myself when we started on this was the grand narrative. Who remembers Osborne's pitching curtains? Who remembers the speeches of the Shirker versus the Skyver? All those terrible right-wing programs that demeaned and made people vulnerable and felt ashamed. And I have to say, how to tell those stories are really important. Who ends up on screen, whose voice, whose face, whose hands, instead of the sculpted bodies of many bodybuilders with very polite accents. So stories do matter, how we tell stories to each other. And one thing that has really moved us greatly after this film has been made is the amount of letters we've got in by so many people who have lived it. And I know many of you have, through your friends, your family, or yourselves. And it's this feeling of, I am not alone. And I think that's really, really important. We are not alone. Can I just jump quickly, because in many ways, we've had our say with the film. Can I just talk about one thing? I went along to hear Jeane Freeman give evidence to the MSPs. And it was very, very interesting. Obviously, he knows exactly what's going on. He knows all the stories that we know. He knows all the academic reports that say sanctions don't help people into work, they humiliate and they frighten them. So there's no point trying to imagine that he does not know what is going on. The bullying inside the job centre, personal improvement plans that workers have put on, all of these things, he knows it all. He did not give a single inch. And I think that's very, very interesting. But if you turn it around the other way around, what's it like with Jeane Freeman coming up here when he sees that every political party bar one is against him? The grassroots are against him. The trade unions are against him. Civic society is against him. All the academic reports saying that these policies of sanctions do not work and cause misery, but yet they still implement. So I think it is time now for a grand coalition to make their politics unworkable so that our most vulnerable brothers and sisters do not have to go through what Daniel Blake and many tens of thousands of others have to do. Now that's going to require great imagination. It's very interesting to listen to Jeane now because she's in a very particular position as an elected representative, the rule of law and all of these things. I remember what happened in Ireland during the 1921-1922. They built parallel organisations to make things unworkable, because I think what's happening now is that for many, many people now, their life will be a misery. They'll lose their £30, they'll be assessed by Maximus, and I think Jeane and her colleagues genuinely will try their very, very best to undermine it, but it'll still be in place. It was very interesting too that the MSPs, Jeane Green was asked by one MSP, will you apologise for the sanctions regime? Of course, he didn't. But the question not is will you apologise? The question is, how do we change the sanctions regime? How do we challenge that per se? So I think we have to ask much more radical questions. I think we have to ask ourselves, why are we so obedient? I think we have to imagine ways that we can give wind to the back of our politicians so they feel pushed by the logic, by the humanity, by the decency to challenge legalism so we make this whole system unworkable. That's very easy for a screenwriter to say. Just imagine it. It has to be done. It's going to take great creativity by the activists, by the politicians. It'll take great creativity. It'll take great energy. It'll take great rigor. But I think we cannot wait just for them to change their minds or change, because they will not. And we have to be really creative, give wind to the back of our politicians, people like Jeane who really do want to change it. But they have to be pushed and pushed and pushed by public opinion, by grassroots, by the trade unions, by decency and by humanity. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Paul. Well, I think we've got some people on our panel who have at least the beginnings of some answers about how we do challenge this grand narrative. And they're going to very quickly introduce themselves. I'm going to start with my left. So is that you, Mike, hiding over there? This is the thing. If you have someone who's partially sighted chairing, it gets to be it's a bit like, who is here? But I think that's you, Mike, at the end. Brilliant. Okay, on you go.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. I'm involved in Edinburgh Coalition Against Poverty. It's a group of people that are claiming benefits, people on low wages, often insecure jobs. What we do is we give solidarity to people that are up against the benefit system. We accompany people to appointments at the job centre and to the assessments like the work capability assessment we saw Daniel undergoing at the beginning of the film. And what we want to do is, along with the other groups here today, organise informal training sessions so that lots of people, dozens, hundreds of people, could get involved in this solidarity accompanying. Because you've got a right to have somebody with you at any benefits appointment, and it can make a real difference. And we need to spread that solidarity. We need to create a movement of widespread direct action to, like Paul said, to make their policies unworkable, to build a counterpower that's coming from the people. It's not a case, like Paul said, of changing their minds. They know what they're doing. What we've got to do is to be stronger than them and actually stop them. We've got to make policies like sanctions, workfare, and cutting disability benefits unworkable. And this doesn't just apply to the millions of us that are on benefits. It's an attack on the whole working class. And like we said in the film, we're trying to drive folk off benefits to accept any sort of crap, low-paid, insecure jobs to undermine everybody's wages and conditions. And there's some really specific things that are needed. We need to abolish the work capability assessment. The person that's best placed to decide if you're fit for work is your GP. Employment and support allowance should be paid on the basis of a sick line from your GP. And we need to pressure the Scottish Government to really use the devolved powers to make concrete changes. You should find on your seats this wee leaflet, and it lists here a good number of measures that the Scottish Government could take in the very near future that would make a real difference. And just to mention one of them, the Scottish Government could stop the disabled people on disability and living allowance losing their benefit in the transfer to personal independence payment. 30% of the people that are being assessed are losing their benefit completely. The Scottish Government could stop this now and protect the benefits of all these people still on disability living allowance. Yeah, just to finish up, I think the answer, the response to this film, which is a really, really accurate portrayal of what actually happens, because we see it every week. The response is anger and action, and we've got to join together. We can't rely on any politicians. We've got to join together, get involved, and actually create a big movement that'll make the disgusting policies that we've seen in the film completely unworkable and lay the foundations for a different kind of world based on human needs, not on money. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'd like to start, first of all, We'll Stop from Inclusion Scotland. We're a national disabled people's organisation which tries to work with the policymakers, the Scottish Government, NHS, local authorities, etc., to try and make sure that disabled people's voices are heard in the policy-making process. And I'd like to really start by thanking Paul for the fantastic job he's done of capturing the lives of the people that are going through this. And yes, it's a harrowing film, but the bits that stand out for me are the instances of kindness, common humanity, from people who have nothing, giving to one another, and just of themselves. And that, I think, is where we need to start in forming a new social security system in Scotland. It should be based on that common humanity to one another that Paul and Ken have shown still exists and can be recaptured, because the poison that is pouring out, the filth that pours out to the mainstream media in this country, attacking disabled people, attacking unemployed people, as the enemy within, has to stop. And the politicians have to show leadership in doing that. And I think we have got some leadership on that. We've got a minister that says people will be treated with dignity and respect, and I think she means it. I've seen her at events, and disabled people have been going along to assessments, they've been going along to interviews at the job centres, and what they tell us when we ask them is they are not heard. But when they've been going along to events over the summer and telling Jeane and officials for the Scottish Government about what they've experienced, they've been coming away from there saying they have been heard, they've been listened to. And the next step, the important step, is to take that learning and act on it and form a system that really can deliver what we need, which is basic humanity to one another. Now, people have criticised the film for, exaggerating things. Well, in my personal experience, there's no exaggeration in it. I have literally taken phone calls from women who have turned to prostitution because they've had their benefits stopped for 3, 4, 5 months at a time while waiting for mandatory reconsiderations to be carried out. Women who were suicidal afterwards because of the shame that they felt. And the real shame is that we allow that to happen. That is the real shame as a society, that we put people through this with nothing to live on. We've got to stop it. I'll stop there and so we can have questions. But the final thing to say is, it's not just me saying this, that all that is in that film is true. The United Nations is saying it. The United Nations have completed a confidential inquiry into the reforms in the UK welfare system and have concluded that there are systematic abuses of disabled people's human rights as a consequence of those welfare reforms. And the UK government's response to that is, we will do nothing to implement your recommendations as to how to improve things. Well, we have to have a government in Scotland that is prepared to implement those recommendations. And I'll leave you with that thought, that one of them is to involve disabled people in the process of designing benefits and seeing that they're carried out in a humane fashion. We're asking for the opportunity to do that as a disabled people's organisation, as a representative organisation. And I know the Minister's door has been open up until now when we want to see her. I hope that will continue to be the case. But we need to be at the heart of setting up the new social security system in Scotland. Not at the sides, not just ask for her opinion, but actually at the heart in making that social security system so it's fit for purpose and serves disabled people's needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's too much to ask for humanity and respect. Okay. Our last panel member is Lewis. Would like to introduce yourself, Lewis?
I'm just going to stand up. I think I feel a bit uncomfortable, like I'm on Jeremy Kyle or something, sitting on these couches. I think Paul's going to tell me the DNA test is accurate today or something like that. So I'm sorry about that. So I'd like to just start by saying thanks very much to Paul and Ken for bringing such an important issue to light on the big screen, for two main reasons. The first is that before I went to go and see it the first time, my mum and dad went to go and see it. Now, my dad's a bricklayer. He's a kind of classic, kind of working class man. He kind of believes what he reads in the papers and has a kind of weird opinion on benefits. And, you know, the kind of classic opinion that a stereotypical working class guy has on benefits. And he came back and he couldn't believe that this was how people were being treated. He just thought of himself in Daniel Blake's shoes and was more upset than I've probably ever seen him in my whole life. So I'd like to thank Paul and Ken and all the actors in the film for just changing somebody's opinion. And if you can change my dad's opinion, you can change anybody's opinion after this day, because I've probably do it. And the second is that we clearly know that this is accurate to reality when on question time you have a Tory MP saying that this is just a work of fiction, this is something that doesn't happen to people in everyday life. Well, it is something that happens to people up and down the length and breadth of this country, and it's absolutely shocking. So I'd just like to just ask you to think of somebody in your family who reminds you of Daniel Blake, who maybe you've seen them do things like that, roll the mouse up the computer screen. Because my mum and dad, my mum had cancer a couple of years ago. Luckily, she works for the civil service, and they're a kind of decent employer, so it was okay for her. My dad had health problems a couple of years ago as well. He works for Fife Council, and again, it was okay. But if they didn't have employers like that, if they weren't in that situation, they would have been a Daniel Blake. They wouldn't have been sanctioned. They wouldn't have been able to use the computer. My dad has dyslexia. He wouldn't have been able to do anything like that. And he wouldn't have had the support there to do that. So what I would say is, think about somebody in your family. Think about the women down the street, the man that you see in the post office, and picture what they would be like. Imagine them in that situation. Get angry about it and go out and do something today. I'd just like to finish on that note, and I'd welcome any questions on anything to do with this topic, because it's something I'm really, really passionate about. So thank you.
I think we're absolutely passionate about this. Willie, did you want to say something now or later? Later. Okay, fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw the session open to questions now. There's going to be two people, energetic people, running up and down with microphones. I'll take two people at a time in terms of questions. And if you can not start talking till the mic comes to you, that would be brilliant. Also, this is going to be a bit of a double act between me and Bill, because he's going to be my spotter. So, have we got anybody? Right, 3 rows back, someone's indicating in the centre of the row, and everything that's said from now on is Bill's words coming out of my mouth. Okay, and do we have someone else wanting to? Got anybody else, Bill? Okay, and then Matt Wheatley is indicating. Okay, so if we can get the 2 mics out, and then we'll start with our first questioner. I want to ask Jeane if you could say a bit more about this kind of parallel system. Because I think, for me, it's a very powerful film, but, being my age, it doesn't surprise me. Maybe get but I'm interested to know if it's evolved matters, which is really, can you say a little more of kind of growth and find out more about the parallel system or the kind of things you can talk about? How does that actually come about? What difference?
We'll just take that second question now.
Hello? Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Matt, before you start, can I just ask you to make this a question?
Yes, actually, I've got 2 questions. So,
First of all,
I'd like to say a really powerful film, full of emotion, which has affected me quite drastically. This is the second time that I've seen it, similar to Sasha there, and each time has been a roller coaster in terms of emotion, anger, pity, everything. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And the unbelievable thing about it all is that this is actually happening today, now, here, all over this country. And unless we do something about it, then it will continue. And that last speaker asked the question, saying, affecting me. What I would say to you is, yes, everybody's going to be affected. Anyway, right, I think I've hopefully got rid of my emotions, and I'll go into the 2 questions that I have. The first question really is about the actions that we need to take to overcome this. What do we need to do? How do we need to do it? I heard Mick said about getting together and making sure that people are represented at whatever thing they're going to the WPO. And yes, that is an effective on a personal level, but I don't think that's going to actually change things totally. We have to be more clever than that. The second thing that a question that I have is directly for the Minister, and that is that I hear what you say in terms of we've got we're going to get not 100% clear. I'd be grateful if you could clarify for us. We're going to get 15% of the welfare benefit or social security system or whatever you want to call it. When are we going to get it? And when are you going to take action to ensure that the worst things that are happening in those benefits, i.e. PIP, and the fact that people are losing their ability to get out and be mobile and so on, when can we do something, and what exactly are you going to do about that?
Okay, thank you, Matt. Right, I'm going to take Jeane first, because two of those questions were directed at her, and then open up the discussion to the rest of the panel. So, Jeane.
Okay, and my apologies that I wasn't clear enough at the outset. So, what happened after this is still echoing. Can you hear? Yeah. What happened after the independence referendum, and people just cast their mind back and bear with me. So there was a thing set up called the Smith Commission, and that commission negotiated on the basis of the what we were told was a vow that was made just before the referendum vote. And that commission was made up of all the political parties and agreed the transfer of certain powers, additional powers, to the Scottish Parliament, to the Scottish Government. Part of that transfer included the equivalent of 15% of the UK spend on welfare, and a number of individual benefits were named. Those benefits are disability benefits, currently DLA, that's transferring to PIP, carers allowance, what is at the moment the Sure Start maternity grant, funeral payment, cold weather and winter fuel payments, and one and two others. What isn't transferring is any benefit that relates to employment. So universal credit is not transferring to the Scottish Government, neither is employment support allowance. So there are 11 benefits. They make up roughly about 15% of the UK spend. They affect 1 in 4 of us, so about 1.4 million people. And we are now in the process of beginning to build a social security system for Scotland, a system that we've never had just for Scotland. So we are in effect building a new public service. And what we've got to do to make that happen is we've got to unpick the 15% out of the UK welfare system, design it in a way that we think works best, we collectively, that is, works best for Scotland, and then plug it back in to that UK system, because there will be people who will be on benefits that are delivered by both the Scottish Government and by the UK Government. And we need to make sure that nobody falls in any cracks in between the two. So we started the process with that 3-month consultation that I talked about and that Bill referred to, where we went to every local authority in Scotland, a number of events organised by people like Inclusion, Citizens Advice Bureau, STUC, others, and listened to particularly people who are currently in receipt of those benefits to tell us what they thought was wrong with the current system and how it could be improved. The next step has begun, and that is that we have to put a legislation through the Scottish Parliament in order to have the legal basis to have a social security system in Scotland. and we have to begin to design what ours should look like. And that's where those experience panels come in, because we're not just determined to hear in a consultation what people with real experience have to tell us. We want them directly involved with us in designing what that system should look like. So that would be, for example, what is the evidence that you should meet in order to qualify for disability allowance stroke PIP? My own strongly held opinion is that that evidence exists either in your GP records or in social care, and that's where we should start. We shouldn't need to have as many assessments as people currently have to go through. I also think our view is, the First Minister, I think, made it clear in the Daily Record the other day, that we should have lifetime awards where people's conditions are not going to improve, and genuine long-term awards. But those experience panels will be the panels of people with real experience who will help us work out all of that. At the same time, we're going to bring together individuals with experience, practical experience of advising and supporting folks through the benefit system, so that they can help us make sure that we don't create any cracks in all of this. Now, what we said at the Holyrood elections in May was that we would take over the full delivery of those 11 benefits in the lifetime of this Parliament. That means that by 2021, we will be delivering them all. That doesn't mean that we can't make some changes between now and then, and we're busy working out what some of those changes could be. But what we've got to hold in our heads is at the end of this exercise, the Scottish Government will be making more payments in a week than it currently does in a year. So the scale of this and the complexity of it to make sure the Scottish system works with the UK system is important that we get that right. Because the one group of people who can't suffer because we've messed it up are people who are entitled to those benefits but don't get them on time or at the right amount because we didn't get the system right. So that's why we're going to use the experience panels and the other work that I've described in order to try and get the social security system in Scotland one that actually genuinely is about dignity and respect, is fair, is transparent, and is built on the basis of real experience from people who have gone through the system and know what needs to be improved to make it work.
Okay. Thanks, Jeane. I'm just going to bring back the panel onto the second question that Matt raised. We've already touched on this, but how actually are we going to do this in a way that's radical and demanding? So we'll start with you, Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, Matt said how the solidarity accompanying the Benefits Office and the disability assessments is really good, but isn't enough. And we agree with that. But just to say first, it can make a real difference. I was at with somebody at their PIP assessment recently, and because of how the Edinburgh Coalition Against Poverty, we've developed a method of making sure people get at these assessments what they really deserve. The outcome was that we could force the assessor to actually take note of all this woman's conditions and actually write it into our computer, and it resulted in the person applying for PIP getting the full amount. So there's no doubt that this sort of basic solidarity can make a real practical difference. But when they still knock us back, what we do is that we do a solidarity call out, and we've got a phone tree, and we ask for folk to turn up at the job centre and back up the claimant and their advocate that is having the problem. For example, at High Riggs in Edinburgh, we had a claimant that we were backing up he was trying to insist that he should not be sent to work for his benefits at some charity shop or company. And the job centre was trying to force them to do this. We were backing them up. But what they did was they actually called the police to evict us from the job centre. So we called on people to turn up at the job centre in numbers. The job centre backed down, and the claimant didn't have to go and work there. Instead, we got proper support in the line of work to do with computers and stuff that he was actually after. So I think this is a practical example of how we can actually make their policies unworkable. That's what we've got to aim at. It's not a case of changing their minds. We've got to make their policies unworkable. And up in Dundee, the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network have what they call an advocacy stall outside the Wellgate Job Centre in Dundee. And they're there 2 or 3 times a week. And if somebody comes out saying their benefits been stopped, what they do is go back right in the job centre with them to try and get it sorted out. And through that process, we can actually put pressure on the job centre so that they become more scared of us being there than we are afraid of them. You know, we've got to turn the tables. And I think an example of this sort of counterpower, this making their policies unworkable, is what happened with the bedroom tax. Just when the bedroom tax came in, what we did in communities throughout Scotland was form local groups, like we had one in your house. And what we were saying was, if they try and evict anybody because they've not been able to pay their rent, because the housing benefits being cut, if they try and evict anybody, we're going to be there in front of their door and chasing the sheriff officers away. And people may argue about this, but I think that was a major reason the Scottish Government put in money so that the local governments could cover the bedroom tax. And what's in no doubt is that's how we beat the poll tax. We beat the poll tax because we didn't pay it and we chased away the sheriff officers. And that's the sort of kind of action we've got to be imaginative and think of a way we can apply that kind of direct action to the situation with benefits. And just to conclude that it's not just an issue for those of us that are claiming benefits now, because it could affect any of us. And obviously, the attack on benefits is part of the whole austerity attack on the whole working class. So it's in all of our interests to support all the different struggles that are going on. If it's workers' struggles or housing struggles, tenant struggles, claimant struggles, we've all got to back each other up. Because some folk will remember this of my age. They may have the guns, but we've got the numbers. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Just to add something, I'll be trying to be. I think what Jeane was saying there is very, very important. This change of culture. Can I just give you just a little example of what I found out in the research, which I think is very, very interesting. In fact, in the film, a lot of the people who were actually working in the job centre were actually the workers who had just retired. And many of them were been working in the civil service for over 30 years. And they were just amazed at the way the culture had changed. And they said they're so stressed, and I thought it was because of the aggression. But the problem is that the bullying they get from managers. Now, this is very, very important. What they're doing is, so all the people like that are going out. Many of them were actually setting up as independent helpers and assistants to people with problems. But what was very interesting, they were picking young people who tried to encourage them not to join the trade union, and so they were much more gung-ho. And I came across a remarkable example of that when I met a whistleblower in this city. And it was remarkable. And they showed me the name of all of the work colleagues, along with the number of sanctions that had been carried out the previous month, along with a letter from a senior area manager saying only the top 3 had carried out enough sanctions, and if they don't pull their socks up, you'll be put on a PIP, this Kafkaesque language that we use. A PIP is a personal improvement plan, and that meant they wouldn't get a bonus of the potential of being thrown out of their job. And at a question and answer afterwards in Liverpool, actually, I actually met someone who was working inside the DWP who refused to carry out the sanctions as demanded. He ended up being kicked out, and he ended up in a foot ground. I spoke to him afterwards. So I think it's really, really important that we remember the bullying and the systematic nature of this within the system itself. And the union, I met so many really good people inside. I remember one guy in particular I met who was absolutely humiliated by what he was demanding to do by his managers. It was to call people in and give them a big run around, ask for their bank statements, say, why are you looking after this relative instead of your brother who lives closer? He was forced to do that. So I think the unions inside these job centres really, really need supported. I think those gung-ho managers who bully people like that have to be identified and isolated. And I think if there is a cultural change that Jeane is talking about just now, this would be the wedge to get the union much more power within this so there's a humane system with the public. But they have to be isolated and forced out. I think that's really, really important. And maybe this might be the wedge, Jeane. If you do with these 11 benefits, this will be the way to see that we don't need Maximus, we don't need an American multinational in there who are making money out of our most vulnerable. So I think there's a great big cultural change that can happen within the system. So I think what you're saying is really, really important.
Now, I'm sensing that there's a lot of other people wanting to ask questions. So what I'll do is I'm going to bring Lewis and Bill in for the next round of questions. So you're not going to miss out listening to them. Okay, so Bill's going to describe to me who's indicating that they want to ask a question. There's someone near the front wearing a white scarf, and there's a lady with a white with long hair somewhere near the middle, according to Bill. So those two, the runners can get up there. That's fab.
Yeah.
All right. We'll get there.
I can't even see up there, Sally. That's
Okay. Okay. Let's go with the person wearing the white scarf.
Thank you. I found the film really heart-wrenching. I worked in public services, and I went into public services to provide public goods for the public. And I'm appalled that people are employed in the public service are being asked to carry out these mean, badly designed tasks. They sound as if they've come out of Kafka and it's not a Catch 22. But what I wonder about, in order to get public accountability, you need public visibility. And this film really shines a torch into those dark areas that the rest of us sitting in our company. We have, in this film, had to look at this area. I wonder, in terms of involvement, in terms of the Minister for Social Security, whether, as well as an annual report on poverty in Scotland, we do have annual reports. In terms of an annual report on poverty, which goes through the Parliament, we can have an annual report from all service departments and an evaluation carried out independently involving all stakeholders. That will mean that none of us have to sit here feeling ashamed of ourselves that we didn't know it was going on. We knew a little bit, but we didn't know enough.
Okay, thank you. Let's have the next question.
Hello, thank you for such a powerful and for me very educational film. I wanted to direct this question to Paul. What are the benefits of using fiction as opposed to documentary to question society and evoke action in relation to current politics?
Okay, thanks. Right, well, neither of them are. Okay, Bill. Okay, Bill's going to have a shot at the first one.
It's actually an answer to Matt's question as well. I think one of the things that occurred to me on the way here this morning is that this cinema would be full of people who probably are already sympathetic to the ideas that Ken and Paul are trying to put across. Whereas we're preaching to the converted. Now, it's still important that that message comes out to us. But one of the things I was thinking about is Christine McKelvey, one of the MSPs in the Parliament, is trying to organise a showing to MSPs in the Parliament. And I think that's important, that MSPs begin to learn exactly what disabled people and unemployed people are going through in the system. But I also think it would be a good idea if officials, civil servants, as I used to be in the 1980s when I worked in unemployment benefit, and Mike and I had a lot of contact with one another. He was at the Unemployed Workers Centre, I was at the Unemployment Benefit Office, and I was a union rep at the time. And we kept up that sort of contact, and I think that is really important to build on that and to do as Paul says, to try and strengthen the union's hand inside the job centres. But the thing we could do is show this film to officials in Scottish Government in the new Social Security Division at Atlantic Quay and Victoria Quay and let them see what people are going through. Because sometimes I think people are too distant. You know, they don't know exactly how it's affecting people. People don't believe that mandatory reconsiderations have no time limit and you can be left without money for months. It's true. It happens. And it happens not just to a few people. Last year, 26,000 people went 6 months waiting for a mandatory reconsideration. 6 months with the choice either of no benefits or signing on and going through the ridiculous pantomime and knowing that you're too ill to work, but being forced to look for work. So I think, one of the things we could do is try and work with a, production company, etc., to maybe arrange free screenings, Paul. I think that, and I'll let Paul answer that benefits his fiction, but, to let the officials see what's there. And the other thing that we could do, certainly Inclusion Scotland's made this offer before, is to try to bring together all the groups who want to campaign on issues surrounding social security. We are not a campaigning organisation, we're a lobbying organisation as such. We're a charity, so there's limits of what we can do in terms of direct action. But certainly we could support you and bring you together, where you could sit down and create a Scottish-wide campaign that can really begin to lift this issue into the public's eye and try and get some notice. And this film is a fantastic tool to do that with.
I'll just bring you in very briefly, Jeane. And then, how do you want to do this, guys? Do you want to go first, Paul?
Okay, I'll be very brief. Just in relation to Scott's last point, we are a very modest little film company. There's only about 8 people who work there in a little office in Soho in London. So it's small, but we have a fantastic distributor, E1, who've been absolutely marvellous, who put real money and imagination into this. They really believe in this, and they've been massively touched by the film, and they've given us a great run. They probably wouldn't be here without their support. And they're also doing something magnificent too, which has never been done as far as I know in the British film industry. But they're organising community screenings. They're going for very little bit of money, like 80 quid, you can hire the film and then show it before it comes out in DVD after it's been had a run in the cinema. So I know there are lots of screenings up and down the country organised. So people who can't afford £10, let's face it, if you're on GSA, I think it's £7.30 a day for all your needs if you're under 25. So to pay £10 isn't possible. So they're organising community screenings and they've done a magnificent job on that. So there's a guy called Ben Meltcalf, if anybody wants to organise it and do that. In relation to your question, very, very briefly, I don't think it's an either or. It's a very interesting question. Documentary or fiction. And it's strange as well. I think sometimes fiction, but at the great advantage that sometimes it can be more fruitful. Katie Morgan in this film, 50,000 families were kicked out of London 3 years prior to the film because they can't afford the housing expenses. There are many, many Daniel Blakes. And in fact, there are many, many tougher stories, as many people here know, than Daniel Blake. But the great advantage of fiction, I think, is you can shape it, you can hone it, you can try and pick in a very tight premise, have a very tight narrative. And if you do that well, with three-dimensional characters, so you can bring in empathy, you can bring in solidarity from neighbours, you can bring in cruelty, you can bring all these crises. You can do that in a very efficient fashion in 2 hours. So I think the stories that we tell ourselves, are really, really important. Yeah, I think of the Grapes of Wrath, for example. That probably told us more about the crisis in the United States and the Great Depression than many, many records. So fiction has great possibilities, but that fiction too can be truthful, I hope.
I just wanted to say a couple of things. The first thing is about the question of culture, because as Paul said, I mean, in recent months I've had many letters and emails from people who currently work for the DWP who say in that communication how much they dislike their job, how much the job is not what it used to be, how they go home in tears. But of course, it's not, you can't just give up your job because it's miserable and it's not what you want to do. But with the help and support of the public, or PCS, which is the main public union, then we will be reaching out through that union to those individuals and to others to help us work out how the culture of our social security system can be got right from the outset. Because I do think the truth is that if we want people who work in the social security system in Scotland to treat those who come to it for help and support with dignity and respect, then that organisation has to treat those who work for it with dignity and respect. And so we need to get that right from the start. Just on the question of the screenings, I think the thing to do is to think about the people who have those stereotypical views about folk who are on benefits, who believe the propaganda, because there's no other word for it, that people on benefits are skivers and are lazy and just want to live off the state, and try and organise screenings there. The reality is, I'm quite happy, I'm sure, that if it can be done in Atlantic Quay and Victoria Quay with Social Security Directorate, I'm sure people would watch that, but very many of them have already been and seen it. And very many of them themselves have members of their family, direct family or a slightly more distant family, who are on benefits of various descriptions, as I do too. So let's not assume that people who are in the civil service know nothing about what this experience is like. And every single one of them who's joined the new Social Security Directorate has positively chosen to do that because they want to build something in Scotland that is very different. So we need to work well with them, as well as with the union, to try and get it right from the outset. And let's find where the attitudes are that need to be changed and take the screenings there.
Right. We've got time for one more question. Now, there were voices of dissent from the back. So have we got one of our runners up there finding someone who neither Bill or I can see?
There was George, and I'm going to give the mic to George. Is that okay?
Well, do I have a choice?
We have someone up here, way in the back.
Okay, my question is really to Jeane. I prefer to call it touches in the film, so for best, where they were carried by the Scots guy and the guy in UK. I thought technically the guy in UK was actually not excellent. But also, I thought the film underlines the basic principle that is the problem with our social security system. That is, it's based on someone's ability to work. That's how it's framed. That's how it's put. It's the cost of getting someone unemployed rather than having them in work. We need to change that mindset. That's the mindset that really permeates the entire problem. Not seeing people for their humanity, but seeing them as economic units. It's not about Daniel Blake being himself, that Daniel Blake being denied as someone who has no economic value. That's what we need to change. There will be many people who will never be able to work. Are we writing them off? Are we saying that, they're just okay for pity? Or are we just saying that so we really can't ever expect them to work? We'll just park them in one corner and not worry about it. We'll only worry about those that we think should be working. That's the mindset that, again, needs to, nobody should have to work, in the sense that if there isn't a job, as Daniel found out, then we can't expect them to work. If there isn't a job that they can fulfill, then we shouldn't be expecting them to do that. And lastly, if there isn't a job that pays a reasonable amount of money, then what we're basically doing is dehumanising one more time. So there's lots and lots of different things that come from this film, which isn't about how we deliver a system. The system is really just a reflection of the values of society, and that's what we're doing.
I think the point about jobs is quite important as well, because you can see on the news that like most of the time you turn it on that they'll have some politician on there raving that there's been 1 million new jobs created. But I mean, that looks really good at surface value. That's really, it's a bit like a swan. On the surface, that seems like everything's going fine, it's going along smoothly. But underneath, if you actually analyse it, there's a lot of like tremors in the water there. These aren't good jobs that are being created. These are jobs that don't always suit people. These are 0-hour contracts. These are low paid, low skilled jobs that really lead you to only a dead end. So I think the point about work is very important, that just because there are jobs doesn't mean that people should do them, doesn't mean that it always suits people, doesn't mean that people actually have the ability to do them. So I think that was a really perfect point. And I think that I would just want to come back to a point earlier that kind of ties into this, that people shouldn't have to work. I think that's a really key thing. And that the movement, obviously the movements that are going to challenge these sort of things are important, but I think the ideas are even more important. And one idea that there is, and there's probably hundreds of other ideas along the same lines, is universal basic income, that takes that kind of economic value that's put on people and removes it, and actually values people as just human beings and treats them with decency. So I think that to actually be successful, obviously we need the unions, like Paul said, obviously we need the movements, obviously we need the broad coalitions, but we need these bold ideas like universal basic income that don't just view people as kind of objects, that don't just view people as human resources that you can move around like cattle. They view them as humans. So, sorry, that's your thought.
Do you want to comment, Paul, very quickly?
Well, yes, I think that last point is absolutely brilliant, because I mean, it's going to be one, I think, perhaps in the future, the whole notion of jobs is going to be so much more automation. Many jobs will disappear. And I think just by sheer reality, we'll have to look at real radical things in the future, at how we share work and how we share resources. And I think a basic citizens' income is going to be something that will come just by sheer logic. And I think, it's not something we should be frightened of. I think it could liberate many people, get rid of this punitive, judgmental system. And I really, really hope it will help communities to thrive and recognise people's creativity, like your gentleman said at the stop. So I think that's the thing we should really look at. I think there's a conference on today in Glasgow about basic income, which I think is time will come, and I think it will help us share resources. But again, it shows the real importance of being very, very creative and rigorous. Because I remember we were doing the film, finding people who were looking for jobs 35 hours a week. There in Hull, there was like 50 people chasing every single job. And that is misery. That grinds people down. It makes people ill. And it's the system that's at fault. And I think as human beings, one thing we really have is creativity. And we really, really have to work on that and let that flow.
I understand that other people are indicating, but I'm afraid that we have to cut the questions. Well, I'm sorry, but we are right. We're not having a dialogue here. We have to be out of here by 1:15. So apologies for anybody who wasn't heard. I'm sure that panel members will be able to stay at the end and maybe address the points that you want to make. Willie, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, to be honest, your hand is welcome. But see your hand. You put your hand up in one of the community screening and help to organise the community screening. No, I understand, but there's also lots.
Tuesday, just recently ended Vapor Wall as a direct result of these cuts. So I did have a few valid points, but obviously it's not.
No. Your point is that there's lots of people who equally are in your position, who are campaigning, who are going along with people that are working in the third sector, in Muirhouse, in Craig Miller, or whatever. Jeane said there's two audiences, and we need to organise the first audience, and that's the people that didn't have a voice. We've had some community consultation, and when you listen to people in those community consultations, you'll hear the Daniel Blake stories. What we want to do now, with your money and the fact that you've came along and you've gave your postal code and your email and whatever, is we want to organise geographically across Edinburgh so that we can start showing the film. The producers and the distribution system has said that we can have pre-release DVDs. That is before it goes to be on sale. No, I'm going to ask you. I'm not here to ask a question. The question is, what do we do now? And in January, and all over Edinburgh, in pubs and in community centres and art centres, we're going to show I, Daniel Blake. We're also going to ask people to come along and be part of that solidarity. So, no, I'll have to tell you, right? That is happening elsewhere. There are voices in West Lothian and Musselburgh, like the people here today, who will be doing the same thing across Scotland, so that we are the wind behind Jeane's back. But we're also, if Jeane stumbles, be the people who pick it up and argue beyond that. We cannot accept and tolerate what's happening. The 15% that's possible to change, we want it right to the edge, right to the most radical changes, so that we can be a beacon here in Scotland for the people that have a Scouse accent, or people from the southeast. We have to show people that it's possible to change the economic and social system by putting pressure on. So people, there should have been somebody from London here. I don't know why they didn't turn up, but we didn't want to just be Scottish. We wanted to be people that all over Britain that are actually campaigning on this. So we'll do our bit here, as the Cuban general said when he was asked by the Americans, right, how can we come to Cuba to help you? He says, didn't bother. He says, you're in the heart of the lion. Destroy it there. And that's the best help you can give. So we fight where we are. We have an idea that we're helping everybody. So we can change the system here. Through Jeane, through the Scottish Government. But we need to do much more than that. We want to be in solidarity. When Mike argued about the poll tax, you see there are two things in the poll tax. There was the ones that could not pay, but there was the other people who would not allow them to lie and be in isolation. So what we're arguing for today, listen mate, this is what we've done. This is an example. We are doing it. Right. So, mate, see your name. Can you give me your name? Because you're going to be the best helper that we've got wherever you are. So what we're going to do is mobilise in the community and show I, Daniel Blake. So please forgive me for ranting. But to be honest, there's a lot to rant about.
Okay, right. Thank you very much.
On 4th of January, we are going to contact you and you can help to build it in your locality. Thank you.
Thanks, Millie. And thank you everybody for being here. The next step is really down to everyone here, and we all need to work together in solidarity. Thank you for being here, and yeah, let's just try and do something to make the most of our Daniel Blake and to actually change the system in Scotland so there is one of humanity and where people are treated fairly. Thanks. Come on, let's take them home, everyone.